Today we're going to be working with the quick sketch. We're going to go over a series of 2-minute, 5-minute, and 10-minute poses. What I am going to be using is vine charcoal. Here's an example of the packet. You take out the sticks of the vine charcoal. They're very soft. You rub it on your drawing. The reason I use vine charcoal is that it comes up very easily. So you could see with the chamois, that's a pretty dirty chamois there, but with the chamois you can wipe off your charcoal and smudge it. Another instrument for moving your charcoal around is a tortillon. So this is an example of a tortillon to smudge the charcoal. And you can see how quickly and easily the vine charcoal picks up with a kneaded eraser. So the supplies I suggest using for the quick study, quick poses are the vine charcoal. And this here is a harder piece of charcoal. It's a 2B charcoal. And you can see that with the kneaded eraser, it's a little bit more difficult to pick up that harder lead. So I'm going to begin with a quick 2-minute sketch. What I'm doing here is I'm picking up the tilt of the head, the tilt of the shoulders. I'm citing the relationships between the knee, the top of the knee, the angle of the knee going into the hip, the angle of the shoulder going down the back into the tilt of the hip, and then the leg coming down, the foot on the pedestal. So I'm looking at all these angles and I'm moving pretty quickly. Angles and shape relationships. Now I've got the knee coming down, connecting to the foot. So I start my quick sketch just looking at the gesture. So when you're working with a 2-minute pose, that's what you're working with. You're looking at basically just the gesture of the limbs, the tilt of the head, the tilt of the shoulders, tilt of the hips. Right now I'm putting in the shape of the head. I'm going to put in the brow line, the nose, and that will help to indicate the angle that the head is tilted. Putting in the neck, shoulders. Shoulders are connected to the forearm and then the elbow. And then I'm just bringing the back right down into the bottom where the figure is sitting on the pedestal. I'm going to go in and reinforce my angles and shapes. And for the 2-minute pose, you're really only trying to get the gesture of your figure. You're just working with gesture. You're not concerned about details. And then you'll just block in the big shadow shapes. Okay, here's our second pose. This is a 5-minute pose. I'm starting with the top of the head of the figure. Work on the cranium, and there's a straight line for the face. Indicates just the shape of the face. And the neck is coming out of the cranium to the back. Here again, once again, I'm working on gesture, looking at the big overall shape of the figure. I'm checking out relationship between the chin and the knee. I'm just looking at that overall shape. The figure looks very much like an egg shape. Keep in mind when you're working on your quick poses, you're looking at gesture and overall shape. You can put details in later. Now that I have that overall shape, I'm going to look at the movement of the knee into the hip, the arm coming down and wrapping around the legs, and the leg coming down and joining into the ankle, and then the foot. And the model is balanced on her toes, so that's where the center of gravity is, directly underneath the shoulder, placing that center of gravity. Now I'm working pretty quickly here, but for a longer pose, you're going to check all these measurements and make sure that your alignments are correct. So I'm just eyeballing where does that hand wrap around the head and that shoulder come in. Just looking at relationships. Once again, it's nice with this fine charcoal because you could just quickly put in value very softly using the edge of it. Here I'm just looking at big shadow shapes. I'm working from quickposes.com. I selected on chiaroscuro. The chiaroscuro gives you a strong light and dark side, which is great to help develop the form and easier to see your figure. Going in with the kneaded eraser to cut out some area in the shape of the face. And as you do your quick poses, quick studies, you'll decide what you want to have dark and what you want to have light in order to be able to see the figure or capture the gesture. Keep in mind these are just quick and very undetailed poses. I'm not worrying about details, we're just looking at shape. The shape of the hand on the head, the angle of that as it moves into the elbow. The tortillon is great for just putting in a field of value and just pulling charcoal right out of the line and spreading it. And the intent here is just to capture that gesture. Okay, now our third pose. This is a 10-minute pose. A little bit more time to work on our measurements. Starting with the head, which is very vertical, and the horizontal line of the shoulders, and then you get this nice curve in the back. Now I'll be focusing on the shape of the torso and the curve of the hips, and that's really what's going to help this figure come together. It's a really beautiful pose. You're looking at the back end of the figure. This is one of those instances where the curve of the spine and the angle of the hips is important to capture. So right now I'm figuring out those angles and putting those angles in my drawing. I'm just looking at the shape as large. I'm looking at the figure as a series of large shapes. The broadness of the shoulders, the thin area of the waist, and then the wider hip area. And then how are those angles changing? And placing those hips on a seat. And then what is holding up that figure? That center of gravity is resting on the forearm, the weight of that figure. So that bringing down the leg of the bench helps to balance the figure on that bench. Now here we've got foreshortening coming in. The legs of the figure, there is not a lot of attention. So there's just a slight indication that the legs move off into the foreground, into the background, while the hips remain in the foreground. So this is where you get your foreshortening coming in on this pose. Keeping in mind the hips are closest to you, and then that left arm swings over into the background, the head is in the background, and the feet are in the background. Here you have the tilt of the head, working with the cranium. What is the shape of the cranium as it moves into the neck? These are crucial marks to get this gesture down. So for this longer pose, I'm focusing mostly on the gesture and the big shapes. And this is a great way to practice just analyzing the figure by just doing these quick sketches. If you were to then go into a figure drawing class, you do a series of quick sketches, and then you really hone in on the values later. Now we have a little bit more time in this piece, so I'm going to go in and block in some of the shadow areas to give more definition to the form of the figure. There's a part of the face in shadow, part of the neck, just blocking in the shadow shapes. And I'll start with a mid-tone gray and then add darker tones later. And what I see here is the core shadow of the muscles across the back. And that really is going to help to define that curve nicely. Now because they are core shadows, I'm going to keep them soft. So pay attention with the figure when you're going to create a soft shadow and when you're going to have a hard edge. I want to make sure I keep the highlight on the top of the hip as it connects to the waist. So I went in with my kneaded eraser to just pick up any extra shadow in there. And right now I'm working on the cast shadow that is beneath the hips. being cast by the bottom underneath the model, strengthening that angle along the upper torso into the waistline and then into the hips. I want that shadow to get darker. Then I'll try to bring that whole form together, just adding a mid-tone. Keep in mind, use your tortillon just to soften things up. When you're working with the figure, you're going to have to decide what edges are soft and what edges do you want to be hard. Charcoal's a wonderful medium if you want to have some transparent shadows where your shadows aren't solid. So I really encourage everybody to experiment with the vine charcoal and really work with the different values that you can achieve with vine charcoal. Now I'm going in with a harder charcoal pencil just to redefine some of those edges, to get a little bit darker than I was with the vine. I don't want to draw too much attention to the feet because they do fall to the background. So I'll keep the feet very loose in this sketch. And keep in mind, this is a sketch. This is not a refined drawing. It's a small sketch. And I'm working in a very limited area, roughly a 9 by 12 inch area for the sake of the demo. So there isn't a lot of space to work with, so it's great for creating small sketches. But I recommend, if you're interested, work large, say 18 by 24 inch with the vine charcoal, and you'll have a lot more mobility. I want to bring the shadow side and the light side together. So I'll go in and add some shadow up, spilling across the top of the shoulders. Just enough to hold the shape together and create a new plane change. I'm putting in some shadow area to create a plane change there across the back and the waist. Here I go in and just soften, putting a soft shadow to connect the neck to the shoulders. And softening my shadows and connecting the figure so it all comes together and is one form.